Well, welcome to number 6 in the Christian mindset in a culture of chaos. Uh, this one is it's pretty much down my alley because in way back in 1975 to 77, I was in class in graduate school and pursuing a degree in Christian apologetics and had opportunity to begin to be introduced to philosophers that I knew very little about, and I had an opportunity to uh, dip my toe into their water to experience something of who these philosophers are and how they thought and what kind of alternatives they offered to the world in regard to how we look at the world and how we perceive the world and how we shape our lives in ways that are, they would think, consistent with the philosophies that they set forth. And so it was very eye opening, to say the least. And so I thought it would be good to include in this series of the Christian mindset something about philosophy, ideology, and religions, and how they all kind of fit together. And so I invite you to join us for this training that we're doing to try to help Christians to have uh, a way of understanding the world and developing a kind of a mindset, a way of thinking about the world that will allow you to carry on conversations with people, but to do it from a Christian point of view. And so I'm trying to expose you to a number of different things that are a part of the of the society in which we live, but they may not always be evident. They may be things under the surface that we're not completely aware of. And so I want to give you some of these things today. So as normal, I want to read the things I wrote to kind of get the discussion started, and then I'll go into some discussion about this. Of philosophy, ideologies, and religion. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the cleverness of the clever I will set aside. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? That's in 1 Corinthians 1:19 and 20. And then in Colossians 2, verse 8, Paul says, see to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the tradition of men, according to the elementary principles of this world, rather than according to Christ. Colossians 2 and verse 8. So what does man do about the inequities that exist in the world? Well, man creates a philosophy of how things work. He embeds it with ideology and creates either a secular or a sacred religion with which people can identify, each with a distinctive label. And so that is what we have in this world. Are you ready for a gross oversimplification of this? Just as a man through science tries to figure out how the universe works on the largest and the smallest of scale, so do men create explanations for human societies and how they work. In my opinion, in the past 150 years, there has been few philosophers more influential than Karl Marx. And I challenge you to read his major work called The Communist Manifesto. The opening line reads this way: the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. The final line of his Communist Manifesto reads this way: the communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries, unite. Well, I can't unpack Marxism here, but the gist of it is that there are two basic classes of people in the world. There are the oppressed and the oppressor. And in order to bring the world into balance, equity, and justice, the oppressed have to throw off the chains of the oppressor through whatever means are necessary. But didn't Jesus say he came to set the captive free in Luke chapter 4? Yes, he did. But the critical difference is, and I want you to really hear me on this, is the nature of the captivity he was talking about and the means by which men can be set free by Jesus. Marx and Jesus agree that there is injustice in the world. They do not agree on the nature of that injustice and the means of correcting it. Now, you may be exposed to some things today that you may scratch your head and say, well, what does this have to do with anything? And I'm going to tell you right now, the philosophies and the ideologies and the religions, whether they're secular or sacred, that grow out of these ideologies, I want to tell you right now that these are the things that drive what people do. These are things that have been taught in our institutions of higher learning. These are books that have been written. These are movements that have taken place in every age of the world. These are things that are ideas that started out in the mind of a person or a collection of people. And these ideas begin to crystallize. They begin to be put into some kind of form. And they became a philosophy, a way of life. They became an ideology that drove people, and people dedicated their lives to these things, and they are what causes our society to be the way it is. We didn't just happen upon the society in which we live. Even the American experience of a constitutional government was born out of philosophy that different people had and how we needed to apply that philosophy in the case of creating this new government. And so I want to explore this a little bit with you today. So philosophy is, very simply put, the love of wisdom. The love of wisdom. Our first message on the Garden of Eden, we made the statement in that first lesson that Eden was created by wisdom. God employed wisdom in the creation of Eden. And we read from Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, on that occasion. And I'm going to read from Proverbs again, but I want to read from a different section of chapter 8. So we're in Proverbs chapter 8. And I want to read a section here starting in verse 30 and going down through 36. And I want you to hear what the wise man has to say and compare it to the philosophies of men. So when we're talking about the wisdom here, we're talking about the wisdom of God. It says in verse 30, "Then I," this is wisdom speaking, "I was the craftsman at his side," at God's side. "I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing always in his presence, rejoicing in his whole world, and delighting in mankind. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Listen to my instruction, and be wise, and do not ignore it. Blessed is the man who listens to me, watching daily at my doors, waiting at my doorway, For whoever finds me finds life and receives favor from the Lord. But whoever fails to find me harms himself, and all who hate me love death. Just see how definitive it is, this idea of wisdom at the side of God that causes men to have life and not death. So many of the philosophies and the ideologies and religions of this world have simply led to death. And so we want to find a wisdom that causes us to have favor with God. You remember in another one of our talks about differences, and we talked about the differences that people have, and we talked about that people are looking for the favor of God and of men. And it says in Proverbs chapter 8, he says very, very, uh, very explicitly here. He says, I want you to understand, he says, whoever finds me finds life and receives favor from the Lord. If we want to find the favor that counts, the favor that causes us to feel complete and whole and and uh, and having purpose in this world, it is the favor that God gives through his wisdom to us. And so philosophies and ideologies and religions constitute a mindset or a world view that we have in our hearts. They are the framework of our thinking. There are many attempts that man has made to construct these, and they're all over the place. There is no end to philosophies. There's no end to ideologies and religions. There's idolatry. There's animism. There's pantheism. There's the impersonal gods of Hinduism. There are just countless philosophies. In preparing this message today, I looked up what are called the 20 most influential philosophers of all times and their big ideas. What were the big ideas that these 20 philosophers who have impacted our lives in ways that we may not even understand? And so I began to look at some of those, and I thought about presenting all 20 of them to you, and I was thinking, well, you're probably not going to sit here for all 20 of them. But I did pull out just a few just to give you a flavor of these 20 philosophers. And I'm just going to give you just a short little version of what their big idea was. So I've just picked, there's so many I could pick out here. Confucius, of course, they had a great influence in the realm of Asia, in China and other places like that. And Confucius believed that morality or right living or equity within the world could come through our self-cultivation. In other words, if we practice certain things like meditation and things like that, we could cultivate the self, and we could create a society that was very moral. And so it was very much a man-centric approach to fixing society. And then there was a man named Descartes. Descartes believed that you should discard any belief that wasn't absolutely certain. So if you couldn't be certain about it, you should not hold on to it. You should discard it, and you should get rid of it. And this idea began to usher in the whole thought that there are no absolutes, that everything is subject to being discarded and thrown away. And then there was a man named, you may not ever heard his name before, but very influential philosopher. His name is Foucault. And Foucault was one of the fathers of critical theory, and we've talked about that before. But critical theory takes a look at social justice issues, human rights issues, things like feminism, racism, all those kinds of things in society, and it formulates a philosophy around how can we find equity in these different areas. and it's called critical thinking, and it is pervasive within our universities today. It has been that way for probably 100 years, but certainly much more in the last 50, 60 years. Critical thinking is shaping the way our universities teach in all kinds of fields, not just the philosophy field. And then there was a man named David Hume. David Hume began to talk about that there are no moral absolutes. In fact, you can't speak in the terms of right and wrong because nothing is ultimately right and wrong. It's only a construct of our society. And so he did away with the ideas of moral absolutes. And then there was a man named Karl Marx that we've referred to already. And in Marx, his philosophy was that class struggle is destined to dismantle capitalism, and it will lead to socialism and communism. And his Communist Manifesto and his approach to things is what is being embraced very openly by many people in our society today. And I don't mean just some debates about how do we solve this problem or that problem. There's plenty of room for debate about how to solve, the racial strife in our country and so forth. But there are philosophies that underlie this, and Marx is one of the key philosophies that is underlying what is going on today. There was a man named John Paul Sartre, and he was espousing a view that we called existentialism, and he believed that there is no creator, that we are on our own, that the only authentic life that can be lived is just to go out and live life to the fullest. Do whatever you want to do. Experience life to the fullest. In his case, and with most existential philosophers, they end up killing themselves because they don't find any meaning and purpose in just going out and living a hedonistic life. And so there is all of these kinds of philosophies, and most of them, again, the average person is not going to study them, is not going to pay much attention to them, but they are what underlies many of the currents within our society and in the world in which we live. And the Christian comes up against these philosophies, against these ideologies, against these religions. And we have to, in a sense, do battle. We have to be able, as Peter said, we have to be ready to give an answer for the reason, for the hope that is in us. And so the battle is really a battle between the wisdom of God and the wisdom of men. Which way are we going? What are we going to embrace? Are we going to trust the wisdom of God as revealed in Scripture, or are we going to trust a man or a group of men or people to come up with ideas and philosophies to order our lives? I want to go to Acts chapter 17, because in the New Testament, one of the best illustrations of where philosophy and Christianity collided was in Acts 17 when Paul came to the city of Athens. Athens was the center of philosophy of that day. And I want to read this whole section here because I don't think I can improve on it, because it really shows the contrast between the philosophies of that age and Christianity when it was confronting those philosophies. So we'll start reading in verse 16. It says in Acts 17, verse 16, "While Paul was waiting for them, his companions, in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. And so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to dispute with him. And some of them asked, 'What is this babbler trying to say?' And others remarked, 'Well, he seems to be advocating foreign gods.' And they said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. And then they took him and they brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, 'May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting?' You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we want to know what they mean. All of the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. And Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and he said, Men of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and I looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, To an unknown God. Now what you worship as something unknown, I'm going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hands, he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, and some of your own poets have said, We are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think, notice that, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he appointed. He has given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead. And that caused quite a stir. Some of them wanted to throw him off Mars Hill, and other people wanted to hear more about that the next day. But I read that to you to say, this is nothing new. The philosophies and the ideologies of the world come and go, and new ones come on the scene, and they get all mixed up together, and they evolve, and we are constantly having to understand the way the world thinks, but we must hold on to the way we think as Christians. What is the Christian mindset? And you could see some of the elements of it in this statement that Paul made on the Areopagus, where he said, look, I'm going to tell you about this unknown God, that he is a God who created the heavens and the earth. He is a God who put men on the face of this earth. He is the God who wants to be known. He wants you to find him. He doesn't want to be in secret. He is a God who is one day going to judge the world through his Son, Jesus Christ. There are so many elements that he includes as the foundation of the Christian mindset in Acts chapter 17. And we would do well to take Paul's words and his example, and this is the way we too must confront the philosophies and ideologies and religions of this world by making a proclamation, by presenting our case for why we believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and why we believe that he is the only way, he is the only truth, and he is the only life that we need on this earth. So we need to be unafraid to confront the philosophies of this world. We need to be very willing to say, this is the wisdom of God. It may not seem like wisdom to you, but this is the wisdom of God. Jesus Christ and him crucified. I hope that we will begin to understand that we are in a battle here, and we need to all be in this together.